My Life with Charles Manson. Chapter the 10th. Chapter 10. The freakout had changed my relationship to Charlie once again, though its impact at the time was more unconscious than conscious. While Charlie blamed the family and the uptight vibes at the ranch for the craziness which erupted, claiming that he had no need to go through such insanity just because we did, thereby justifying his own quick and convenient departure, it was clear that he had failed to confront his own insecurities and fears. He had violated his cardinal rule: no one splits during an acid trip. In the meantime, I had unwittingly assumed leadership, moving from a role of passive submission to one of self-assertion. Both the choking scene and the freakout were experiences I had learned from. I owed that to Charlie, or, at least, I believed I did. Charlie, on the other hand, had grown increasingly more frustrated, first because the family scene was not coming together as he envisioned, and second, because of his failure to sell his music. He was divided within himself. On the one hand, he wanted a spiritual, communal life with the family, with nothing to do but make love. On the other hand, he sought success as a commercial entertainer and wanted to influence the world with his music. We all believed the trip to the desert would resolve things. Charlie urged us to psych up for the desert. We did, most of us anyway. All but Kim. For Kim, the freakout proved a violent and impassioned swan song. Shortly thereafter, he left the family. 2 days after his departure, the bus returned from San Jose, and we began preparing for the journey. After completely rebuilding the engine, we bought new heavy-duty batteries, rewired the electrical system, and rigged up large adjustable outside mirrors. We loaded the cabinets with spare parts, tools, and an abundance of dried foods. The girls redecorated the interior, painting the dashboard and replacing the curtains. As we worked, Charlie's mood became buoyant. Cappy had described her grandmother's ranch as a veritable paradise of orchards, vineyards, and magical beauty, a place where we might realize our spiritual goals and truly come together. Soon, everyone was sharing Charlie's enthusiasm. When word got out that we were leaving, the wranglers began coming around to inspect what we'd done to the bus. Benny shuffled in one afternoon, sipping some Jack Daniels. "Looks like a friggin' whorehouse," he quipped, removing his hat. "Cops are gonna shit if they pull you over and peek in here." He had a point. The interior was lavish to the extreme, a 2-room salon with plush carpets, pillows, satin curtains, a low-hanging tassel-studded headliner, a gas stove, and a new refrigerator. We were ready. On the afternoon of October 31st, 1968, I observed Charlie sitting on the hillside above the ranch, smoking a cigarette. I waved at him, and he waved back. Minutes later, it must have been about 4 p.m., he came down from the hill and sauntered into the ranch house, grinning. "Let's get out of here." In less than an hour, everything was packed and loaded. Mattresses, blankets, clothes, musical instruments, food supplies, 5 cases of Zuzus, a kilo of grass, and 50 tabs of acid. We all boarded the bus, and Charlie fired up the engine. Tex cheered. "Listen to that baby hum." Charlie cackled and gave him a thumbs-up sign. Then he drove down the back road to the saloon and honked the horn. Squeaky and Juanita came running out and waved to us. We all waved back. They were to remain behind to keep an eye on George and the ranch. Charlie headed along the boardwalk, honking at Randy Starr, who was ambling across the road, carrying a saddle. "Keep a tight asshole, cowboy," Charlie shouted out the window. If Randy heard him, he didn't let on. We swerved to the left and bounced on down the rutted driveway along the corral gate toward Santa Susana Pass. That's when I spotted a jack-o'-lantern perched on top of a fence post and realized it was Halloween. We camped the first night in a canyon somewhere in San Bernardino County, near the Cajon Pass. The following morning, we took off at sunup, driving north on Highway 395. The girls brewed coffee and served it with sweet rolls and donuts. The sun was bright and the air began to clear as we drove deeper into the desert. The expansiveness of the terrain after so long in LA was a real rush. I sat up beside Charlie, who was driving and smoking a cigarette. His hair was long and disheveled, hanging across his shoulders in twisted strands as he hunched over the wheel. He was ebullient as Snake handed him a steaming cup of coffee. He took a sip. "Out here," he said, swallowing, "we got breathing room. It's alive. The sun can get to you and there ain't no hassles with cowboy motherfuckers and city rats. Look beyond that ridge. The way those clouds are. Looks like Malibu surf," he enthused. "Yeah, here it's breathing, man. Here our music can breathe and our love can breathe. You dig it? Hey, Paul, we should have come to the desert a long time ago." When we got to Ridgecrest, we turned west along the Argus Mountain Range to Trona, then down into the Panamint Valley. Everyone was at the windows surveying the majesty of the landscape. The Panamints, 11,000 feet in some places, towered above the valley floor like craggy, prehistoric beasts. The sun blazed off the land, heat waves slithered along its surface. I could make out the timberline of pinyon pine on the lofty face of the range, an incredible panorama. Gnarled fingers of basalt and granite seemed to cling to the valley floor, claws of sediment clutching at us as we droned through the vast immensity, singing songs and munching zuzus. Cappy had come up front to sit by Charlie and me to point out landmarks. Catherine Gillies was 17 and slightly overweight, with a cute, pixie-like face and short, flaxen hair. From the very beginning, she exhibited a strong commitment to the family scene. Charlie liked her. In time, she would become one of Charlie's most capable and sequacious followers, even after he was convicted of the murders. "What exactly did you tell your grandmother?" Charlie wanted to know. "I just said me and some friends were going to come up and stay at the ranch." "But you didn't say how many, right?" "I just said some girls and me, mostly." "What if she gets nosy and sends someone up to check?" "She won't." "Any other places up there?" "There's the Barker Ranch." "What's the story on that?" "I don't think anyone's there. I'm not sure." "It doesn't matter. We'll check it out. Hey," Charlie grinned, putting his arm around Cappy. "This is God's country out here. You know it." Cappy beamed. "Hey, Paul, why don't you sing that song of yours about the crazy women in Peru? You know?" Juan snapped his fingers. "Yes, I like that song very much, too." Clem tossed me the guitar. Everyone clapped. Glancing at their faces, it was hard to imagine the freak-out ever happened. Sadie sat near the rear of the bus nursing Zizos. Pooh Bear was asleep. Juan lay sprawled out on the floor, a languorous grin on his face, his Stetson pulled over his eyes, a toothpick dangling from his mouth. The others sat huddled together beneath the satin canopy. Clem, Brooks, TJ, Ella, Stephanie, Weish, Bo, Juanita, Katie, Sandy, Brenda, Snake, and Tex. The windows were down. The heat was stifling. I took a sip of water from my canteen behind the seat, then sang the song. It was a song written by a high school friend, Rabbit Mackay, one we'd sung together often before dropping out of school. I am just a stranger here. I come from down the road. I did not come to ask you all to help me share my load. I came to sing my songs for you, and to tell you where I've been, and maybe share a little time before I'm gone again. I was born in California at a very early age. My mother, she was beautiful. My father worked the stage. But I could not seem to go along with all they had in mind, so at the tender age of 14 years I left their house behind. Oh, I was free to put to sea, and it was 1962, so I went down a fishin' tuna in the waters of Peru. Oh, the sun, it was so hot down there, it drove the women all insane, and soon the salt of the 7 seas was flowin' in my veins. Now I've seen the wall in Germany, and I've felt it in the South, and I've heard it said that freedom is just a ramblin' at the mouth. Yes, your masterminds and their dividin' lines, whether just a passin' trend, 'cause freedom is a song of spirit written on the wind. It was late afternoon by the time we drove through Ballarat, a one-store outpost in the middle of the valley floor. From there we proceeded south, deeper into the valley toward Goler Canyon, where we would begin our ascent to the Myers place. Once out onto the alluvial fan, we started a gradual climb toward the base of the wash. The road was strewn with loose rock and in places was scarcely visible. Juan, Weesh, Sandy, Snake, and Charlie climbed up on the front fenders while TJ drove. Everyone was singing and drinking soda pop we'd purchased in Ballarat. The valley was incredible, silent and timeless, with nothing around us but the towering, monolithic walls of the canyon and an endless expanse of desert. I sat in the back. The bus weaved and swayed. The gold tassels hanging from the headliner danced and reflected in the sunlight. Suddenly our vehicle seemed strangely appropriate for this desert pilgrimage, like riding on the back of a camel. I looked out the rear window at the rock formations, stark against the flat terrain. Joshua trees and mesquite grew in clumps along the base of the mountain. To the left, the salt flats were interspersed with poppies, cholla, and desert holly. From time to time, something alive scurried across the road, a jackrabbit, a kangaroo mouse, and once an animal that looked like a cross between a raccoon and a squirrel. Cappy called it a ring-tail cat. Finally, we arrived at a plateau on the base of the canyon and parked beside the remains of an old ranch house. Only the foundations were visible. On the ground, scattered amidst the decomposition, were rotted jeep tires, hubcaps, scraps of bleached canvas, and several whiskey bottles. I don't think we'd better take the bus up Goler, Cappy said, standing beside Charlie. It's too rocky. Yeah, looks like one mean-ass drive, Charlie concurred, gazing up the wash. We'll park here and hike in. How long's it take to get up there? 2 hours, maybe 3, if it doesn't get dark on us. So the first of many treks up Goler Canyon began. Sadie and Mary carried their infants strapped to their backs. The rest of us grabbed armfuls of supplies, bedding, food, jugs of water, and packs, and started up the wash. A wind from the south had put a chill in the air, and the sun was setting. Directly overhead, the clouds had elongated and turned crimson, appearing like disjointed entrails squeezed from the bowels of the sky. Within an hour it was downright cold, and we all put on jackets and sweaters. I was hiking alongside Clem and Snake, with Cappy just in front of us. The others followed, scattered along the trail, some as far as a mile back. Halfway up, the canyon widened out, becoming green with clusters of mesquite. We filled canteens at a desert one-room shack Cappy called the halfway house, then hiked beyond it onto the sloping flatlands where springs flowed in from the surrounding hillsides. The rock formations became less severe, more rounded. In the distance, the mountains looked like scoops of melting ice cream. We shouted down the canyon at the others, and they shouted back. At the top of the wash, we proceeded along a narrow road behind Cappy. She pointed out the Barker Ranch off to the right, a low-slung dwelling secluded behind a stand of wind-blown cottonwoods and fronted by a grape vineyard. But we didn't stop to check it out. Instead, we trudged another quarter of a mile to the Myers Ranch. Cappy had not exaggerated. The surrounding property was lush with vegetation, salt cedar, tamarisk, fig, cottonwood, willow, and apple trees, and behind the house a rolling expanse of vineyards and wildflowers. The ranch house itself was small and unpretentious, with a fair-sized living room, 15 by 30, a fireplace, 2 small bedrooms, a tiny kitchen, and an outdoor bathroom just off the back porch. The foundations of the house were made of narrow-gauge railroad ties, taken years before from a defunct Epsom salts mine, then plastered over with stucco. It was a rusty, cozy little place, and we moved right in and built a fire before gathering around to eat zuzus and canned fruit cocktail. By 9 p.m., everyone was asleep. The following morning, we were all up at dawn. The girls made hot cakes and a huge vat of coffee, and we sat around the fire eating while Charlie divided us into scouting parties. All morning we hiked the roads and trails through the mountains above the property. I went with Clem, Sadie, and Snake. Around noon, we hiked to a promontory which towered over the ranch, and from which, to our right, we could look out upon the floor of Death Valley. We could see the thread-like road to Shoshone and Tacoma, and beyond it, the highway to Las Vegas, the great American desert, 360 degrees of tortured, tumultuous, serene, and undisputed wilderness. We couldn't have chosen a more scenic and strategic location. Death Valley is starkly surrealistic. Ideas that would have seemed utterly inconceivable to me in West Los Angeles were perfectly understandable on a crystal-clear morning from the peaks of the Panamint Mountains. The desert is a ready-made acid trip. Perhaps for that reason, the greatest visions of Indians and holy men have taken place on the desert. There has always been magic in the desert, and a good deal of myth surrounding the ambience of Death Valley. It has been called the hottest place on earth, devoid of animal life, vegetation, and water. Salt-infested pools and deadly gases, it has been said, fill the sand pockets of the valley, together with quicksands that lie across the bottomless salt marshes. Mules, it was once claimed, were the only beasts who could withstand the infernal heat. Not true. There was always life in Death Valley, animal life, vegetation, and human life. As a family, we came there looking for that life, an elemental life, which we had begun to lose contact with. Death Valley actually forms but one part of the Great Basin of the Great American Desert, an incredible arid trough spread over thousands of square miles. There are thousands of streams within the basin, but not one of them ever reaches the sea. The valley itself is actually the sink of the Amargosa River, most of it below sea level. This is the land where the rivers are upside down, with stream beds on top and water beneath the sand and gravel. The phenomenon always perplexed Charlie, who, from the time we arrived, began speaking of a hole in the desert, which would lead us to water, perhaps even a lake and a place to live. I remembered days, after we'd been in the desert several months, when Charlie and I would walk the valley floor along the borax flats, dry lakes, alkali washes, and salt sinks, looking for the hole, a subterranean world, a cave, a place where we might take the family and make our home when the shit came down. The idea of a hole was by no means a completely crazy one, since all water which flows into the valley only to emerge elsewhere, as springs, out of pure bedrock, must go someplace. The entire mystique of subterranean worlds, infinite space, magical mystery tours, I am you and you are me, no sense makes sense, and so on, was much more palatable in the desert ambiance. The cosmic vacuum of the desert was a perfect place to program young minds. Shortly after noon that first day, everyone gathered at the top of Goulder Canyon at the Barker Ranch. Barker's, though less spacious than the Myers place, was also built in the midst of dense, oasis-like vegetation. At the time we arrived, it was in a general state of disrepair, and the vineyards had all gone to seed, growing in a tangle around the house and up the latticework along the walls. It had a small living room, a bedroom, a bathroom, and a good-sized kitchen. It did not have a fireplace or electricity, and relied on heat from a custom-made oil drum stove, complete with small burners and an oven. Off to the right of the main ranch house was a bunkhouse made of railroad ties, which reminded me of the outlaw shacks at Spawn's. In general, the Barker place was funkier, more weather-beaten, and somehow more conducive to the scene we had going. The place was completely deserted except for an amiable, bow-legged desert rat and one-time prospector named Ballarat Bob, who sometimes slept there while wandering around the Panamints. Charlie was still paranoid about staying at the Myers place with so many people, particularly since Cappy's grandmother was under the impression they were all girls. When he asked old Bob if he thought we might move into the Barker place, the old geezer said he thought so, but that it might not be a good idea. Just for the record, to speak with the owner, Ma Barker, who lived down the valley at Indian Springs. Charlie agreed, and the next morning he and I hiked back down the wash and drove to Indian Springs to talk to Ma Barker. We found her easily enough in a small, weather-tight cabin, surrounded by a flaccid chain-link fence. She lived alone most of the time, and that morning was seated on her front porch, dozing with a newspaper in her lap. Charlie wasted no time in laying his wrap on the gray-haired, grizzled old gal. It's like me and Paul are musicians. You know, we done some music with the Beach Boys, and now we need some solitude to do our music, get our own gig together. Up there on that mountain at your ranch, well, it's about as pretty a place to compose music as I'd ever seen, right, Paul? And if we get lucky and sell some stuff, who knows, we might all get rich. The old woman nodded, rocking back and forth in her chair, her eyes half closed. A scrawny Siamese cat purred at her feet. Like George Spawn, she looked listless and torpid, but she hadn't missed a thing. She said she was more than willing to let us stay at the ranch so long as we kept her place in order and fixed what needed fixin'. Why, sure, she said as we were leaving. That's fine. You just take care of my property and do some good things. That'll be fine. Charlie thanked her again and gave her a Beach Boys gold record. Then we split back down the Panamint Valley, stopping at Ballarat to buy soda pop. During Charlie's rap with Ma Barker, I'd picked up the Las Vegas paper and had noted a reference to a racial incident in Haight-Ashbury. The article stated that a San Francisco policeman had recently shot and killed a 16-year-old black kid who had allegedly pulled a gun on him. I took notice of the story only because the location of the shooting, just off Fillmore, was 1 block away from a place I had crashed in the summer of 1967. I mentioned the article to Charlie as we drove through the valley toward Goler Wash, drinking our pop. "Dig it, man," Charlie said, gesturing with one hand while steering the bus with the other. "This shit can't go on forever without Blackie. Pretty soon he's gonna revolt and start kicking Whitey's ass. I've seen it building up for years. It was bad enough at Watts in San Francisco, but now that they wasted that jive-ass Martin Luther, well, that's a heavy number, man. I mean, you gotta figure Whitey's karma's gotta turn one of these days. It's just a matter of time. The heavy dudes, though, are the Muslims. I've seen those cats in jail. They sit back real stoic-like and watch and stay cool, you know. But they'll be the ones who bring the shit down. Yeah, it's gonna come down hard. A full-on war. And when it does, we're gonna be glad we're out of there. The trouble with Blackie is he wants to fuck all the white women, turn all the white babies brown." Charlie jettisoned an empty can out of the window. "That brings a lot of shit his way. I mean, I was never meant that the races get mixed. That's what fucks everything up. That's what makes Whitey mad. But it won't do any good, 'cause it's Blackie's turn. His day, you know. Hey, man, we don't want any part of that. It would destroy our whole scene." I didn't pay too much attention to Charlie's racial rap. It sounded pretty far-fetched. I knew he didn't like blacks, but with the exception of an occasional offhand slur or an old prison joke, he never really said much about Blackie. I never dreamed that in time the notion of a racial war between Blackie and Whitey would become the core of Helter Skelter.